Hello and welcome to the Point, and I'm Dr. Laura. I'm joined today by Dr. Richard Kent. Hello, Richard.
Hi, Laura.
Today we're going to be talking about another exciting topic, to the point, and today it's to do with the nervous system. It's to do with how God created nervous conduction. It's to do with the chemicals that are transmitted at the synaptic junctions, irreducible complexity of nervous conduction, and also just to tie it up with how this fits in with God that we serve, the God that we love, the God that we know, who created our body. So first of all, Richard, we're going to go to your presentation, which is fun facts on the nervous system.
Okay, let's go straight to it. Hello, my name is Richard Kent. Today I want to consider the nervous system in our bodies and how they work. I'm only going to look at part of the nervous system because it is so complex I couldn't possibly describe all of it in one short little segment. Our nervous system is unbelievably complex. We have a central processing system called the brain, which weighs about 3 pounds, protected by our skulls, and uses 20% of the energy produced in our bodies by the Krebs cycle. If you deprive the brain of oxygen or sugar for only 3 seconds, I will be unconscious and fall off my chair, and within 3 minutes I will be dead. So I want to talk now about how the actual nervous impulses are transmitted to the periphery of the body. And I want to describe, first of all, the size of the problem. Now, you may be familiar with wiring diagrams of your car, for example, or of your central heating system, or maybe a wiring diagram of virtually anything today in electronics today. Let me tell you that if you were to put on paper the wiring diagram of the human body, you would end up with a wiring diagram that is larger than the wiring diagram of the telephone system of the entire planet Earth, including all the mobile phones and including all the satellites as well. That is how complex your nervous system is. That's how large your nervous system is, and yet impulses travel along nerves at the rate of 250 miles an hour. Now, God has designed a very, very sophisticated way of actually transmitting these electrical impulses along these tiny little axons, which are the long strands of nerve cells. So I want you to look at this picture, and I'll try and explain it to you. The center of the cell is actually negative, and the outside of the cell is actually positive. Normally, the center of the cell is minus 60 millivolts. Normally, the outside of the cell, by comparison, is positive. So there's a polarity, an electrical polarity across the cell. Now, separating the cell, the nerve cell, from the outside of the cell is what's called a semi-permeable membrane. That means most of the time, potassium cells inside the cell and sodium ions outside the cell can't get in or out of the cell. But actually, at the point of depolarization, a gate is opened at the periphery of a cell, and sodium ions come in, making the inside of the cell positive compared with the outside. So you get what's called an action potential of about plus 40 millivolts, only for a few milliseconds, and then a gate is closed so that the no more sodium ions can come in, and then the polarity is reversed by potassium cells going out through a different gate, so that the whole thing is reversed, and then the sodium and potassium pump works to restore polarity back to normal. So basically, what actually happens is that an impulse travels down a nerve cell by God having designed a very, very intricate design of changes of polarity electrical polarity of the inside and the outside of the nerve cell according to how porous or how permeable the cell is to potassium and sodium ions. Now, can you imagine anything more complex than that? It's unbelievably complicated, and how evolutionists think that this could possibly evolve by chance is completely beyond me. This is totally supernatural and shows every sign of an intelligent, wonderful designer. His name is Jesus Christ. Thank you for listening, and God bless.
And welcome back to The Point. Thanks so much for that presentation, Richard. It's amazing how the nervous system has so many bits to it, the many different sides to the nervous system. You've got the peripheral, you've got the central, you've got the autonomic, which is sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. And how amazing that these the end results are electrical impulses to organs such as muscle. For instance, you know, my ability to move my finger is due to an electrical impulse coming from my brain and affecting the motor system of my body. And in normal practice, in general practice, and of course, Richard, when you were not retired, quite a lot of nervous system related illnesses they're out there. It's fascinating that even just the fact that you need ions like sodium and potassium to make things work properly, and even calcium as well, function of muscle. It's interesting how if these are too low or too high, muscles don't work properly, or there might be excessive working of the muscles. You can get a heart arrhythmia just by having too much potassium, for instance. And how all these are so intricately balanced. There is a range at which these ions can function, and if you've got too little or too much of those ions, they don't work so well. The whole electrical activity breaks down. And this thing about reducible complexity, I mean, it really comes in here because you think, well, for all these processes to happen, they have to happen together. They couldn't one have developed and then another and then another. So confusion, for instance, you can get confusion, which means there's something going on in the brain, because the brain has got two sides to it. It's got the left and the right side. You've got different lobes in the brain, and they all do different things as well. So if someone's confused, they may be confused because they've either had a stroke, or they may be confused because they got an infection, or because they got not enough sodium. And all those things will lead to the same apparent symptom. And just to show how important all the different parts are. So if you got too little sodium, the person may have everything else working, but they will still be confused, because that's important. And so diseases, and there are lots of neurological diseases, nervous system diseases like Parkinson's disease, which is due to not enough of a neurotransmitter, or things like Alzheimer's disease, which is due to the breakdown of the cells, and therefore there's not enough cells being, nervous impulses being transmitted because of these plaques and towels that blocking the transmission of the nerve cells. Then you've got vascular diseases like strokes and TIAs, what they call TIAs, or mini strokes. You've got structural problems like brain injury. Somebody has an accident and they have problems with their brain. Bell's palsy, cervical spondylosis, and all sorts of things that all end up affecting the way the nervous system functions. And they're all interrelated and interconnected. Amazing.
It is truly amazing.
Absolutely amazing. I mean, I could go on. There are lots and lots of other medical conditions, but I'd just like to bring you in for now, and then perhaps we can go back and discuss some more of them. So irreducible complexity of the nervous system, not evolved.
Yes, irreducible complexity, absolutely. Well, on these programs to the point where we're talking about the different systems, and virtually any one of these systems, whether it's the respiratory system, the circulatory system, the nervous system, or any system, they're all irreducibly complex. In other words, they couldn't possibly have evolved as is claimed in the fairy story of evolution. So I'd like to highlight, first of all, how humans have designed electrical conductivity. Here we are, here's a picture. Just stay on that picture just for a little while, if we could. I'll just try and explain that. First of all, an electrical current through a wire, whether it's silver or copper, gold, aluminium, or any other sort of wire, will only happen if there is an external electrical force. I use the word electrical force to make it simple, that's not the correct word. But in atomic structure, the peripheral atoms sometimes break loose, and they're called free-floating electrons in a sea of electrons. And those little red dots are meant to illustrate the point that there are free electrons just doing nothing. They're just basically floating around amongst the metal atoms. And those free electrons are negatively charged. Now, if you put an electrical current across that, whether it's a battery, as in a torch, or whether it's a car battery, or whether it comes through the mains through your power station, if you put a charge, electrical charge across that wire, then the negatively charged atoms, the free-floating electrons, the negatively parts of the atom, that is the free-floating electrons which are negatively charged, will simply flow to the positive charge, and that is basically man-designed electrical current. So, if you come back to me now, basically electrical current is something that man has designed. There's nothing wrong with it. It's a good way of getting power around the place, in a television station, or in your home, or in your car, or in a factory, or in a plane, or anywhere else. Everything happens as a result of electrical current. But the point I want to make is that you do need a power supply, whether it's a battery, or a nuclear power station, or a coal-fired power station. You need an external source. Now, why have I told you all that? Because the human body is totally different and far more complicated than that. So let's look now at the human body. Now, in the human body creates its own electricity within the cells. Each neuron, a nerve cell is called a neuron, has a very long connecting part called an axon, and each neuron connects with up to 10,000 different axons. Now, the electrical charge passes along nerves at 250 miles an hour, and this actually happens within the axons by the movement of sodium and potassium ions across the cell membrane. Now this, what I'm about to tell you, is really complicated. You wouldn't design something like this unless you were God. In fact, humans couldn't possibly do this. Only God can do this, to create something as complicated as this. Now, if we go back to the same picture, I'll try and explain to you what actually happens. Basically, looking at the top picture there, okay, I don't know if you can see that on the top left there's an area which is coloured blue, and that's where the periphery of the cell, the periphery of the axon, has become what we call semi-permeable. And sodium ions flow into the cell, and potassium ions move out of the cell, creating a polarity across the cell membrane. Now, before the sodium ions started moving in, the potassium ions started moving out, the inside of the cell was minus 40 millivolts, or up to 60 millivolts, compared with the outside of the cell. But during the actual movement of the potassium and sodium ions, the inside of the cell becomes positively charged at plus 40 millivolts compared with the outside, and that is what is called an action potential. Now that change in the wall of the membrane, so the wall of the axon, the change in permeability is what actually propagates the electrical current along the axon, the nerve, at 250 miles an hour, which is very fast. Now, having gone, once the action potential has passed through, there is another system called a sodium pump, which actually removes the sodium ions out back to the outside of the cell and the potassium ions into the cell. Now, as if that wasn't complicated enough, there is an even more complicated system, which I didn't actually describe in the first presentation, which is what happens when one neuron meets another neuron, and that's at the synapse. Let's have a look at the last picture. Now, this works completely differently. This is not propagated, this impulse is not propagated electronically, as in the case of an axon. No, this is propagated by something called a chemical neurotransmitter. Now, you've got to remember that your nerve cell, any one nerve cell in your body, communicates with up to 10,000 different cells. And the whole of the body is regulated by hormones. You've heard of hormones, you've probably heard of insulin, but as far as the nerve cells are concerned, there are four or five very well known what we call chemical neurotransmitters, and I'll tell you the names of some of them. The best known possibly is acetylcholine, followed by noradrenaline, and then dopamine. Lack of dopamine can cause Parkinson's disease, and then of course melatonin, which is the sleepy hormone. If you want to go, when your body decides it's time to go to sleep, your brain is flooded with melatonin, and then conversely, serotonin, the happy hormone, if you like. Serotonin is the happy hormone. Now, all of these chemical neurotransmitters directly affect the synapse. There are chemical neurotransmitters which are released as a result of electrical activity from what's called the afferent dendrite. That's the one on the top, and these chemicals are released into this synaptic cleft, the area between two nerves, and are received on special receptor sites on the efferent dendrite, the one on the right. And if there's enough stimulation, then the whole electrical charge is propagated. Now, of these neurotransmitters, some are excitatory. In other words, they make an electrical discharge more likely. Some are inhibitory. In other words, they make an electrical discharge less likely. And God has designed this very, very complicated chemical neurotransmitter pathway so that under certain conditions, an electrical stimulus is propagated from one axon to another axon. And remember, in your body, you have literally millions of different axons. Can you think of anything more complicated than what I've just described to you? It is so complicated. We couldn't possibly manufacture this in a factory. We just can't do it. Only God could do something like this, to have a semi-permeable membrane which changes its permeability so that sodium ions come in and potassium ions go out, and then a chemical transmitter which releases, as a result of electrical activity, actual physical neurotransmitters into the synaptic cleft between the two nerve endings, some of which inhibit and some of which excite the efferent side of the synapse, so that if the conditions are right, the electrical impulse is propagated. And all of this happens so fast, at 250 miles an hour, and it has to. For example, let's take my heart, for example. In my heart is a bundle of, it's called a bundle of His. It's a collection of nerves which stimulate the atria and the ventricles to contract and relax in a particular way. If it didn't if the heart didn't contract and relax in a particular way, so the blood is push through the 4 valves in the heart in a particular way, then what you effectively have is what's called ventricular fibrillation. In other words, the heart is sort of contracting, relaxing in a sort of, how can I put it, not a unified, correct way, so that blood will not be moved around the body. You've probably seen in maybe a medical type drama on television, somebody having a heart attack, and their heart goes into either asystole, which is a straight line, or ventricular fibrillation, which is all over the place. And what they do is they put their paddles across to make the electrical current go right. The whole point I'm trying to make is the whole body is totally totally dependent on electrical activity, and caused by the most complex way that you can possibly imagine of these, first of all, the semi-permeable membranes, and then the neurotransmitter. Can you think of anything more complicated than that? Well, I'll tell you one thing that's completely daft is the fairy story of evolution. This all happened by chance. How can something possibly happen by chance that is so complicated we can't even do it ourselves? There's only one person who can do that. His name is Jesus Christ. He is a highly, highly intelligent designer. He is a superlative scientist. He is amazingly clever, so ingenious to design something which we can't even we can barely understand, let alone actually manufacture in our own factories. Laura.
And absolutely fascinating, and it's so incredibly humbling to know that we can't do this. There's no way.
No.
And even when we try, I mean, first of all, think about the amount of space it'll take just to design something that is so intricate and so microscopic as God has designed. Think about the space it'll take just to design a human being with all those electrical connections, all that wiring, and all the nerves.
Yes.
Impossible.
Yes.
And, you know, as a doctor, again, I see lots of patients with different neurological problems, even the common ones like a febrile convulsion.
Yes.
A child has a febrile convulsion, and the noddy explanation is that they haven't got the insulation, the sheath, developed fully, and so they're short-circuiting of the nerves as it goes along, because it's not fully insulated. And of course, if you think about an electrical wire, we do have insulation, so you can see the analogy there. But it even goes even more deeper than that. Depression, you were talking about the happy hormone, serotonin.
Yes.
And we've designed, man has designed antidepressants called selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors to stop the uptake, as normally when the neurotransmitter is transmitted, then it's taken up and deactivated and recycled. But these happy pills, as you call as they are, stop that from happening so that the serotonin concentration remains high in the brain, and so people feel better. And of course you can get that also by doing things like exercise, because you are sort of stimulating the same pleasure centre in the brain. And God has just created this amazing thing. And do you know what? People who worship God actually have the same effect as taking antidepressants or exercising. So, you know, people who actually worship the Creator have that same buzz, as it were. So it's good to worship because they do feel, you know, it actually uplifts them to look to God and to worship and to praise Him. So epilepsy is another example of this when things don't go right. So febrile convulsions, epilepsy, depression, because it is physical, and a lot of people, and I know some people think that depression is not, but it is actually. There is, in lots of people who are depressed, there is actually a lack of serotonin. Yeah. As simple as that, and that's why they feel better when they take medication. So we got Parkinson's disease, you talked about dopamine, problems with sleeping, melatonin. People who work in shifts, for instance, have this problem because they're awake when they should be asleep, and they're asleep when they should be awake. And it's trying to get the whole thing right, the pineal gland, all the other things that are involved in the sleep-wake cycle. It's all amazingly complex. And you cannot reproduce it in this size, or even you just can't. It's just impossible to reproduce such a thing. So it gives glory to God all the time. And I'd just like to read a scripture there just to give glory to God, because he deserves it. He deserves all the glory. And this is taken from Mark 12:13. It says, "And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength." Richard, awesome. Absolutely awesome.
Well, I'd like just to chime in there. I mean, we have these programs, Laura and I have these programs, and Birgit comes on occasionally, to talk about worshipping God with all your mind. We want to bring to your attention the amazing scientific ability of God to create such a fantastic machine, the human body, so we can understand with our mind just how great God is.
He is a great God, and we thank him for the ability to know him on a personal level, but also to be aware of his creation, to be aware of how he has intricately created our bodies. And we see that way in lots of ways. When disease happens, we see how things that he designed haven't worked because of different things have happened, genetic or lifestyle or whatever. Things have changed and things have become diseased. We see how God has made things perfect, but because of the fall of man, because of sin, disease and other things have crept into the picture. But we do thank God for the fact that he's given us this amazing wisdom. We thank God that he's created us so perfectly, and we thank him because he's given us the knowledge to understand how he's created us. And if you do want to interact with us, please email Richard and myself, and the email address is tothepoint@revelationtv.com, and we will try and respond as soon as we can to your emails. But it's actually been wonderful just describing this amazing nervous system that God has created, Richard. And thank you so much. It's fascinating. It's like going back to medical school, actually, just the whole physiology and anatomy of the nervous system. It's really amazing. For those who are interested in more programs, stay tuned to the Point. We're on at the moment on Mondays, is that right? And repeated throughout the week. Just go onto the Revelation TV website and to check the scheduling programs for To The Point program. But we will continue to bring these programs to you, and next time, join us again next time for more interesting facts on To The Point. God bless you, and see you again soon.